My mother-in-law took the microphone out of the dive shop owner's hand before he'd finished reading my name, held it against her chest like she'd been waiting all night for the chance, and told a banquet room full of divers that she was the one who taught me to dive in her backyard pool when I was a girl. My name is Lena. My husband is Curtis. My mother-in-law is Denise, and in the 8 years I've known her, I have never once seen her get in a swimming pool, let alone teach anyone to use one. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should, and I promise it comes back around. I run the dive program at Blue Anchor, a shop on the coast that's been teaching open water certifications since before I was born. I started there as a 19-year-old front desk hire who couldn't afford my own classes, doing inventory and answering phones for store credit until I'd saved enough tip money to enroll. The man who actually taught me to dive was Gus, Blue Anchor's senior instructor, a sunk-yard 60-something who'd been running checkout dives off the same jetty for 3 decades and who initialed every student's log himself, in blue pen, because he didn't trust anyone's memory once nitrogen and excitement got involved, including his own. I still have the log he started for me. It's a beat-up green binder with a cracked spine, and it is, without exaggeration, the most carefully kept document I own. Curtis and I met 4 years after I got certified, by which point I was already teaching my own students. Denise, his mother, took an interest in my work almost immediately, the way she takes an interest in most things that reflect well on the people around her. At first it was harmless. She'd ask about my classes at dinner. She'd tell her book club I was practically a mermaid. I didn't mind that. It was the next part I minded. It started small, the way it always seems to with Denise. About a year into dating Curtis, I brought her and Curtis's father down to Blue Anchor to watch one of my Saturday pool sessions, the Intro to Scuba class where nervous beginners try a regulator for the first time in 4 feet of chlorinated water. Denise stood at the edge the whole hour, arms crossed, and afterward told one of my students, a woman in her 50s trying to conquer a fear of open water, "I taught Lena everything she knows about the water, you know. She used to be terrified, and I got her past it." I laughed it off in the car. Curtis apologized on her behalf, said she just liked feeling important in front of strangers, and I let it go because I had 4 more classes that week and a limited amount of patience I was trying to ration for things that actually mattered. By the following summer it had moved into the family group chat, which has Curtis, his parents, his sister, and an aunt in it. Denise posted a photo of my new dive computer, the one I'd bought with 3 months of saved paychecks after my old one flooded on a night dive. "Catchin', so glad we could help Lena get this. She's come so far since I first got her in the water." I read that message probably 6 times, sitting in the shop's back office surrounded by rental fins. I had never taken a cent from Denise for equipment. I had never taken a cent from Denise for anything. Curtis's sister sent back a heart emoji. Nobody corrected it. I told myself I was choosing my battles, which is a phrase I was starting to use a lot, and which I now understand mostly means asterisk not yet asterisk. That was the week I started keeping Gus's old green binder somewhere I could actually put my hands on it, instead of in a box in the shop's storage loft. I told myself it was because I wanted to log a shore dive I had coming up. That was true. It also wasn't the whole truth, and some quiet, tired part of me knew it even then. In October, Denise showed up unannounced to my Tuesday try-dive night, the free pool session Blue Anchor runs for people who've never breathed underwater before and want to see if they like it before committing to a full course. She wasn't on the sign-in sheet. She stood near the shallow end in street clothes and told a father and his teenage son, both waiting for their turn on the regulator, "This one's a natural, always has been." I had her doing laps before she could really talk. I was closer than she realized when she said it, close enough to watch the father nod politely and the son glance at me with the mild confusion of someone doing math that isn't adding up, since I clearly hadn't grown up anywhere near Denise. I didn't correct her in front of them. I finished the session, walked her to her car afterward, and asked her, as evenly as I could manage, to please not come to my classes and talk to my students. She told me that I was being sensitive, that she was proud of me and didn't see the harm in saying so. I said the harm was that none of it was true. She said, "It's true enough," and got in her car. Asterisk it's true enough. Asterisk I've turned that phrase over more times than I can count since. By December, at Curtis's cousin's engagement dinner, I overheard her telling his uncle a story I hadn't heard before, that her own father had been a Navy diver, and that watching old photos of him as a kid was what had made her so determined to get me comfortable in the water. I have met Denise's father. He was an accountant in Ohio who, according to Curtis, got seasick on a lake cruise once and never got back on a boat. There was no Navy diver. There never had been. I said nothing at the table. I went home and wrote the date and the exact wording in a note on my phone, the way you log a dive whose details you don't trust yourself to remember accurately 6 months later. I had, without really deciding to, started keeping a second kind of record. In February, a regional diving magazine reached out about a feature on women running dive programs on the coast. 3 pages, photos of the shop, a sidebar on my students. I did the interview on a Thursday afternoon between classes. The following Monday, the writer emailed me, "Quick follow-up before we finalize. Your mother-in-law called our office and said she wanted to be quoted as the person who first got you into diving. Want to make sure we credit the right people." I sat with my phone in my hand at the front desk of Blue Anchor for a full minute before I could type a reply. I told the writer the truth, that I'd learned to dive at Blue Anchor under a senior instructor named Gus, starting the summer I was 19, and that no family member had been involved in any capacity. I offered to send a photo of my original certification card if it would help. The writer thanked me for the clarity and said that wouldn't be necessary, but something in me had already decided it might be necessary someday, somewhere, and I started pulling together more than just a note on my phone. I didn't confront Denise. Curtis offered to, more than once, and I told him not to, because I didn't want this to turn into a fight about her feelings instead of a fight about what actually happened, and because by then I already had a plan that didn't require anyone raising their voice at a family dinner. Blue Anchor's 20th anniversary gala was scheduled for the second Saturday of April, held in the shop's biggest warehouse bay with the boats pushed to one side and folding tables set up where the racking usually goes. The shop's owner, a soft-spoken man named Marty who'd taken over from his father, had told me 2 weeks earlier, quietly, that he wanted to name me the program's first master scuba diver trainer that night, a certification level I'd been working toward for 3 years, and that he wanted to say a few words about it in front of the room. Curtis and I planned the evening. On the drive down, Marty would call my name. I'd say a few words. We'd sit back down and eat the good crab cakes Blue Anchor always orders for these things. Denise had asked to come along to support Curtis, which meant supporting herself, though none of us said that part out loud. She arrived early, before even the caterers had finished setting up, and took a seat at the table nearest the small stage they built out of the same pallets they use for tank racks. I felt her presence from across the room the way you feel a current shift before you can actually see anything moving. I told myself it would be fine. I had, after all, come prepared. Marty got up around 8, thanked the room for 2 decades of business, and started in on the announcement: my name, my years at the shop, the certification. He'd gotten as far as "and I want to personally recognize," when Denise stood up from her chair so fast it scraped the concrete, walked to the front, and lifted the microphone right out of his hand before he'd even registered what was happening. She turned to the room, found her footing like she'd rehearsed this in the car, and said, loud enough to carry to the back tables, that she was the one who taught me to dive in her backyard pool as a little girl, that she'd always known I had it in me, that watching me up here tonight was the proudest moment of her life as a mother. The room did what rooms do when they don't yet know they're watching something come apart. They clapped. Politely. Uncertainly. Curtis's hand found mine under the table and gripped it hard enough that I understood he was furious, more furious than I was, maybe, because I had been expecting some version of this moment for over a year. I stood up, walked to the front, and took the microphone from her, gently, the way you take something from someone who doesn't yet know they're about to hand it over. I thanked Marty. I thanked the room. And then I said I wanted to actually show everyone something, if they didn't mind, because it was the 20th anniversary of a shop built on keeping honest records, and I happened to have one with me. I'd brought Gus's green binder in my bag all night, on purpose, and I set it on the podium and opened it to the first page, my very first checkout dive, dated the June I turned 19, initialed in blue pen by Gus, with his instructor number written next to his name the way the certifying agency requires. I read the date out loud. I turned to the page from my open water certification exam, also that summer, also Gus's initials, also 3 full years before Curtis and I had even met, let alone before Denise had ever heard my name. I turned to a page near the back, a laminated form tucked into the binder's inside pocket that I'd kept for an entirely different reason, a resort waiver from a family trip Curtis's parents had taken us all on 2 winters earlier, the one where the resort required every guest to fill out a water activity form before using the pool deck. Denise's form was still in there, because I'd found it funny at the time and asked to keep it as a joke. Under swimming ability, in her own handwriting, she'd checked the box marked * non-swimmer * and written, in the margin, * scared of water, will not be entering pool. *. I read that line out loud too. Not unkindly. Just factually, the same flat tone Gus always used, calling a dive plan, no editorializing, just what happened and when. Nobody clapped this time. Denise's face did something complicated and then went very still, and she said, quietly, that she didn't see why I had to bring old paperwork into a nice night, and I told her, just as quietly, that I'd tried asking her nicely in a parking lot in October, and she told me it was true enough, and that some things don't get to be true enough forever. She left before the crab cakes came out. Curtis stayed, and so did his father, who found me by the drinks table afterward and said, without much preamble, that he'd filled out that same waiver form the same day, and that he'd wondered for 2 winters why I'd asked to keep a copy of his wife's. I told him I hadn't known either, not really, not until I needed it. Marty finished the ceremony 20 minutes later like nothing had happened, handed me the certification, and the room clapped again, this time like they meant it. Denise hasn't come to Blue Anchor since. She still tells people, according to Curtis's sister, that I overreacted at the gala, and I've decided I'm at peace with however she wants to remember that night, because for once in 8 years, the room remembers it the way it actually happened, and so does the binder, in blue pen, dated and initialed exactly the way Gus taught me to keep it.